This really happened to me, and even now it feels strange to say it out loud. I'm 54, a first-time founder from Austin, Texas, and what I'm about to tell you was the ugliest, most clarifying year of my life. At the glass conference table on the 8th floor of Capital Factory, the investor slid a term sheet toward me, and that's when I saw it. He'd pledged my ex's American Express card as Collateral. The room smelled like dry erase ink and old coffee. My team pressed into the chairs along the wall, and the HVAC hissed as if trying to shush us. Dorian Hale clicked his Mont Blanc and said we were all gathered to make history. I stared at the clause, felt my cheeks burn, and understood that the humiliation I thought I'd survived was about to become my weapon. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I built a small energy analytics startup called Parish Grid from my kitchen table in South Austin, 2 miles south of Lady Bird Lake, near the HEB on South Congress. I'd been a product manager ages ago at Dell, and then at a smart thermostat company that vanished into bankruptcy, leaving me with a severance check and a stubborn itch to finish what the executives abandoned. I rented a desk at Capital Factory because the view of Frostbank Tower's angular crown tricked me into believing anything was possible at 50. I had a high school friend, Tegan, who wrote the back end in Rust, and a UT junior, Amara, who designed a dashboard that would have made Steve Jobs smile, measuring micro fluctuations in consumption from rooftop solar so apartment buildings could shave their demand charges. We called it the thimble because the data trickled in drips that added up to a flood. The first time my ex, Mark Delaney, mocked Parish Grid, he did it gently, in the cozy twilight of the Driscoll Bar, beneath the mounted Longhorn and the amber glow of lamps that make liars look dashing. "It's adorable that you're trying a startup at your age," he said, and kissed the top of my head. He had a venture sales swagger and a costly smile, the kind that convinced SaaS founders to trust him with their enterprise accounts. He was 10 years younger and, this is hard to admit, my favorite mistake. Before we broke up, he promised to help me pitch, then sabotaged a demo day at the AT&T Conference Center by whispering to a partner from a Houston fund that my code was duct tape and prayers. He'd been cruel in a performative way that men in tech sometimes perfect, the kind of cruelty that looks like concern in a transcript. We ended 6 months before the Capital Factory table scene, after a dinner at Laundrette on Holly Street, when he told me, "I just don't have time for your science fair project." I took an Uber home alone, cried on my patio under a string of dim cafe lights, then did what I always do, made a list. The list began with pilot customers and meter integrations, and embarrassingly included stop checking Mark's Instagram. I stuck it to my fridge with a blue magnet shaped like a guitar from Waterloo Records and started over. The invitation from investor Dorian Hale arrived like a golden ticket. He ran Hale Ridge Ventures from a glassy suite near the Republic Square trees, and he had a reputation for special situations. Translation, he liked messy founders. He came to my tiny office near the elevator bank with a scarf tossed over his blazer, even though it was 95 degrees, and he said the right things in a low, confidential voice. "You're overlooked talent. I like non-obvious markets." I built my first company with a woman older than me and learned my best lessons the hard way. He touched nothing on my whiteboard except the magnet with my list. He peeled it off, read it, and laughed. "Relentless," he said. "I like relentless." 4 coffees, 2 drive-bys to check your momentum, and a scripted serendipitous run-in at the Starbucks Reserve on Congress later, Dorian told me he wanted to lead a $750,000 seed. He talked term sheets and poetry, pro rata like a love song, liquidation preference like a lullaby. Tegan and Amara were giddy enough to start pricing better health insurance. I texted my sister that Mom's garage attic could stay as it was. No return to Round Rock. We planned a signing day under the neon glow of the Willie for President mural on the side of Stag, because even joy in startups has to be Instagrammable. We set the real signing later in that conference room with the view of Austin angled like a clean cut. On the morning we were supposed to sign, I wanted to do something superstitious and private to settle my nerves, so I walked around Lady Bird Lake, counting bridges and thinking of nothing. The sun came up pink over the glass of the Austonian, and my mind kept slipping to the last time I'd seen Mark, 2 weeks earlier at the Littlefield Building elevator bank, where he'd told a friend on speaker that Parish Grid was a women's book club with a GitHub. He made sure I heard that. I raised my hand like a student who didn't deserve to speak and said, "We just landed a pilot," but the elevator doors closed. Hours later at Capital Factory, Dorian slid the term sheet across the glass table. I scanned it, frowning at the capitalization, the non-compete language, the things founders pretend to comprehend. Then my eyes snagged on a short clause under security, interest, and consideration. The words collateral and card authorization, and then AmEx ending in 4007. The name beneath in tiny, polite italics, Mark Delaney. For a second, I thought it was a sick inside joke. My first instinct was to leave. My second was to vomit. My third, the one that mattered, was to breathe and keep reading. Because if I understood the play, it meant I wasn't the pawn anymore. I could become the board. I set the paper down and asked, steady as I could, "What is this?" "Creative collateral," Dorian said, as if we were discussing a party favor. "A temporary authorization to backstop working capital, all above board." Using my ex's credit card. Using a guarantor's card. "He believes in you," Dorian said, smiling in a way that made belief feel like a trap. "We're all believers here, right?" Everything in me wanted to explode. Instead, I smiled back and said, "Then let's talk about the details," while my thoughts sprinted to the last 6 weeks. The wrong number calls, the phishing emails that mimicked my bank, the LinkedIn DM from a Houston founder who asked if I really needed that bridge from MD. I traced the outline of what Dorian thought he'd built, a quiet pipeline from Mark's arrogance to my desperation, and realized I'd let both men think I was as fragile as a rumor. I let the weight of that realization hold me in my chair until my voice came back. I said we needed to reschedule for later that afternoon because Tegan and Amara wanted to review something. Dorian's Mont Blanc clicked. He nodded like a king granting a favor. He had no idea he'd just granted me time to win. When you spend months being underestimated, you develop a sixth sense for how schemes are stitched. Mine sharpened the moment I left the conference room and walked quickly, calmly, to the stairwell. I didn't take the elevator because I needed the thud of concrete steps to pound clarity into my body. On the 4th-floor landing, I called Amara and told her to pull every email we'd received from Hale Ridge Ventures and Mark in the past 2 months. Flag anything with the words authorization, guarantee, hold, and temporary, I said. Also search for 4007. I told Tegan to screenshot server logs from the night before demo day at UT when our staging server mysteriously spit out a corrupted build. I called my sister Claire, who is a nurse at Ascension Seton, but also the most ferocious person I know, and I said, "I'm going to ask you for the meanest thing. Don't let me react. Remind me to think." I walked in circles on the sidewalk by the old, battered metal bike racks while the city heat rose like an audible thing. Then I called someone I rarely call, a lawyer. Her name is Patrice Mendez. We'd met during a free legal clinic for founders at the University of Texas Law Entrepreneurship and Community Development Clinic on MLK Boulevard, where she told me once that predatory capital likes desperate math. "It always pretends to be sophisticated," she'd said, "but the math is just, you need money, we can hurt you." I told her what I'd seen in the clause. I told her the name Mark Delaney. There was a long silence. "That's unusual," Patrice said carefully, "but not illegal per se. I need to see the document." "I told them we'd reconvene at 4, I said. "They think I'm dumber than a mailbox." "Good. Stay dumb for 2 hours, Patrice said. "Email me the PDF. If they won't email it, photograph it. And she added, do not sign anything. Do not initial. Promise me. I promised. Then I walked to Royal Blue Grocery on Congress, bought a Topo Chico I didn't drink, and sat at a corner table to search my texts with Mark. I don't know what I was looking for. Evidence, an omen, anything besides memories. I found a thread from 2 months earlier, weeks after our breakup, when he wrote, if you want to look serious to someone like Hale, you need someone like me behind you. That's just how it works. I had answered, I'm not a magic trick you reveal. He'd replied with a thumbs up and a winky face. By 1 o'clock, Amara had sent me an email containing a neat table of red flags, a DocuSign envelope from Hale Ridge Ventures with an attached guarantee of performance that looked like it had been stapled onto a standard safe like an afterthought, a PDF titled Collateral Authorization, Temporary Hold, signed with a scribble that looked like Mark's scrawl, a thread where Dorian's associate asked for the full legal name on the guarantor's card so we can file the UCC lien properly. Why a UCC lien? Amara wrote in the email. Isn't a safe unsecured? Usually, I wrote back, unless someone wants leverage. Tegan, angel that he is, had not only pulled the server logs, but traced an IP address that pinged our staging environment at 2:13 a.m., the night before demo day. The IP mapped to a WeWork in the domain Northside Complex. Dorian had an office there, so did Mark's sales consulting practice. Tegan circled a line in the log where a build was pushed with a tampered environment variable that made the thimble graph spit nonsense. Pretty sure this was deliberate, he wrote. He attached a gif of a fox in a henhouse. I forwarded everything to Patrice. She called me immediately and said, bring your phone and whatever paper you have to my office on West 15th, across from the Travis County Civil Courthouse. Do not call anyone else. I walked the 10 blocks in a heat that wrapped my lungs like plastic and climbed the stairs to Patrice's second-floor office, where a box fan rattled in the window and the carpet smelled faintly of long-dead cigarettes. She was waiting with a yellow legal pad and a pen with a feather taped to it. It's my war pen, she said, and waved me into a chair. The first thing she did was teach me a new kind of patience, listening to my own humiliation as if it were a deposition. Dates, times, names, the color of the pen that signed the thing, the temperature of the room when he said, the other thing. She made me recite the Driscoll bar conversation and the elevator moment and the term sheet clause in a monotone, as if it had happened to someone else. When I'd finished, she nodded and said, good, now we plan. Plan what? I asked. How to make men who think they're untouchable trip on their own shoelaces, she said. But it's not enough to be right. We have to be right in public. Patrice's plan sounded outrageous because it depended on me being composed. First, she had me write a short email to Dorian. Thanks for the draft. Before we sign, I want to confirm that the collateral authorization is a temporary hold only and that it's fully revocable by the guarantor at any time. Then she had me BCC a personal address she used for certain inadvertent disclosures. Second, she asked whether I had any communications from Mark that suggested he'd volunteered his card knowingly. I told her about a birthday text where he bragged about his points, nothing more. He'll say he offered, Patrice said, but he won't have clean documentation. The mess is the point. Third, she looked at the log evidence and said, this is a separate war, tampering, interference, maybe CFAA at a stretch, but we don't need to win everything. We need to win the narrative that you were strong-armed by a fund colluding with your ex to secure a predatory stake in your company. That's the story. That's what LPs fear. LPs? I said, flushing with the student's embarrassment I thought I'd aged out of. Limited partners, she said. The rich people behind his fund, they despise reputational volatility. We're going to give them a weather report. She drafted a notice of potential claims under the Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Act and a pre-suit letter for tortious interference. She printed them on crisp paper that made a sound like money and slid them into a manila folder labeled Parish Grid, Defense, Offense. Then she checked the time. "You reconvene at 4, she said. "You're going to go, and you're going to be so polite it hurts. You're going to let him talk. You're going to ask him to explain the clause on the record." She handed me her phone and opened the voice memo app. "You'll put this in your purse and hit record, and you'll set it on the table where the mic can hear the pen clicks." "That's legal?" I asked. "In Texas, one-party consent," she said. "You're the party. Enjoy your party." My hands shook when I left Patrice's office, and I pretended it was caffeine from the cold brew I hadn't actually finished. I walked past the courthouse, where a long line of people waited for probate hearings and name changes and divorces that would seal or unseal their futures. I whispered to myself something my grandmother used to say when she taught me to sew: "Measure twice, cut once, then stitch like you. Mean it." I did not feel like a warrior. I felt like a woman who would prefer to crawl into bed and let the day pass unremarked. That feeling, I decided, could not be trusted. The feeling that would guide me would be the one Patrice named, the desire to be right in public. At 4 o'clock, back at Capitol Factory, the room was the same, dry erase fumes, glass as clean as a lie, except all the chairs felt a degree colder. Dorian smiled as if nothing in the world could go wrong. "We all set?" he asked, and I thought of the words "we" and "all," and how they can be both invitations and theft. I pressed record on Patrice's phone, slid it under a notepad, and said, "Before we sign, I want to understand the collateral language." I looked at the word in the document again. "Temporary," I said. "It says the hold is temporary and revocable by the guarantor at any time. Is that right?" Dorian's smile was a bright weapon. "It's just a belt and suspenders move," he said. "We like all parties to feel confident. If your guarantor wants to remove the hold, he just has to notify us. No big deal." "How would he do that?" I asked, pen poised as if I were a court reporter. "Email? Phone call? A notarized letter?" My voice was casual, the way you ask for dessert menus while you're planning to leave without ordering. "Email is fine," Dorian said. "We're flexible." "Great," I said, "because I think he'll want to revoke it, and I'm sure you'll want to explain to him why this looked like a good idea." Something flashed behind Dorian's eyes. It was brief, the kind of flicker you only see in men who've practiced not flickering. He glanced at my team, then at the windows as if Austin could give him cover. He clicked his pen once, twice, a metronome for his patience. "Why don't we loop him in right now?" he said. "We're all friends." "Let's," I said, and slid my phone onto the table beside Patrice's, speaker on, my thumb already over the contact that read, "Mark Delaney, do not automatically answer." I tapped. "Ab," Mark said, voice smooth, as if he'd been expecting a call to collect his applause. "Is the big day finally here?" "It is," I said. "Dorian has you down as the guarantor. He says the collateral hold is revocable at any time. Is that your understanding?" Mark laughed, and it wasn't friendly. "Don't be dramatic," he said. "It's a tiny hold. I told Dorian we want to appear serious. You know how optics work." "Optics," I repeated and tasted the metal of the word. Tegan's jaw tightened. Amara's hands fluttered over her laptop like birds trying to decide whether to fly. I said, "Mark, did you authorize a lien filing under your name?" "Excuse me?" he said. "A UCC-1, I said. "Patrice says it's standard in your world. Did you agree to that?" The line was quiet for a beat, then Mark's voice sharpened. "Who the hell is Patrice?" "Hi, Mark," Patrice said, and for the first time Dorian's pen stopped clicking. I heard Mark exhale the way men exhale when they've been invited to a game with rules they didn't invent. "You brought in counsel," he said. "Cute." "It's not cute," I said. "It's self-defense." "We're going in circles," Dorian said, temper sifted with honey. "We're here to celebrate. If everyone's comfortable, let's sign." "We're not signing," I said, and I laid a printed email on the table, the one Amara had pulled, where Dorian's associate asked for Mark's full legal name on the guarantor's card so we can file the UCC lien properly. I put a second printout on top of it, Tegan's screenshot of the 2:13 a.m. staging server hit from the WeWork IP. We're going to talk about this first. I have no idea what that is, Mark said. That's your office IP, I said. The night before demo day, our staging environment got scrambled. You told people our code was sloppy the next day. I guess it looked that way. Optics. Concerning, Dorian said, because the word concerning is what men say when they mean, I'm going to flick you off the table like a crumb. You can call it concerning, I said. I call it interference. Dorian stood. He had the kind of posture that looks expensive. We don't need drama, he said. Ab, you're a talented founder. Don't let small things ruin your moment. I could feel the decision building, the kind of decision that once would have flattened me. Claire's voice spoke in my head. Think. Patrice's voice layered over it. Be right in public. I pressed my palms on the cool glass and said, calm as a hospital corridor. We're not signing, and in 1 hour you'll receive a notice of potential claims and a request for preservation of documents. Do not delete anything. Do not shred anything. We'll be in touch with your general counsel and your LPs. The air went thin. Are you threatening me? Dorian asked, incredulous, then amused, because he thought the amusement would shrink me. No, I said. I'm promising you. Dorian smiled the way apex predators smile at the water, expecting it to ripple away. Then let me make a promise too, he said, and leaned over the table. No one in Austin will fund you after this. I didn't grow up needing permission from a room, I said, and Austin isn't the entire map. We left without the term sheet, the glass door sighing shut behind us like relief. In the hallway, I shook so hard I could barely tap the elevator button. Amara hugged me so tight I wheezed. Tegan whispered, "Holy hell," as if Holy and Hell had agreed to share a sentence. I texted Claire one word, "Done." She replied with 3, "Proud, stay mean." We decamped to Better Half Coffee and Cocktails on West 5th and sat at a picnic table under a string of lights. The sun hadn't set yet, but the day already felt like history. Patrice arrived with a stack of manila and a face that told me she had good news she'd wait to share. We send this tonight, she said, and slid across the table a letter headed, Notice of Potential Claims, Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Act, Tortious Interference, Computer Fraud and Abuse. At the bottom, another letter headed, To the Limited Partners of Hale Ridge Ventures. You can't send that, I said, throat dry. Can you? Watch me, she said, but I need one thing first. Which is? You have to stop acting like you're still inside their story, she said. You're writing yours now. The letters went out at 6:30 p.m. Patrice hit send with a flourish that felt almost theatrical, but I knew the theater was the point. Within 20 minutes, Dorian replied with a line that could have been drafted by a committee. We take these allegations seriously and will investigate internally. An hour later, a Hale Ridge associate called me from a private number and said, Let's not escalate. I let it go to voicemail. At 9 p.m., Mark texted me from a number he thought I didn't recognize. You're making a huge mistake. No one will touch you now. Claire texted a minute later. He's wrong. By morning, the email had reached someone more interesting than Dorian, a woman named Judith Green, who represented an energy family in Midland and, more relevantly, had put $10 million into Hale Ridge's second fund. She wrote to Dorian with me copied, We are concerned about the use of personal credit arrangements as collateral in a seed investment, particularly where there may be a conflict of interest with a related party. Please provide a memorandum by Friday. She CC'd someone at Norton Rose Fulbright, a law firm with a name like a bank vault. Dorian responded with a flurry of words that sounded like silk. As a courtesy, standard practice, misunderstanding, we value our founders. Judith replied with one sentence. Your memo by Friday. Friday came like a finish line I didn't earn, but I'm old enough to know you don't flinch from good luck when it's the kind you paid for with your nerve. Patrice had me ready with a package. Server logs, correspondence, the suspicious DocuSign, a transcript of our recorded call, cleaned by a friend of hers who does depositions, and a statement I signed in the lobby of the Travis County Courthouse, under the eyes of a security guard whose boredom felt like a blessing. She added exhibits numbered with Roman numerals and a cover letter that used words like seriatim and hereinafter, because sometimes the old language has the sharpest teeth. That afternoon, Judith called me. I took the call by the greenbelt because I needed trees to remind me of things that didn't care about venture capital. Ms. Parrish, she said in a voice that made me think of high-shelf bourbon and hard judgments, I appreciate your forthrightness. We're concerned with Mr. Hale's practices. Are you prepared to consult privately? We may ask you to speak to our counsel. I said yes, but I also said something that would have embarrassed me 6 months earlier. I'm building something that works, and the less time I spend on this, the better. Judith was quiet for a beat, then said, Of course, we'll be brief. In parallel with the LP weather report, Patrice filed a petition for a temporary restraining order in Travis County to prevent any lien or collateral action that touched my company or me without explicit consent. We learned that Dorian's office had already filed a UCC-1 financing statement naming Parrish Grid Incapino and guarantor Mark Delaney. It was sloppy. They filed it with a date predating my meeting by 2 days. The clerk at the courthouse stamped Patrice's petition and said, Good luck, honey, with the kind of sympathy that made me want to cry again, but this time from gratitude. Then the second war began, the one that would reveal whether Mark's sabotage was an accident, a favor, or a felony. Tegan, who has the kind of brain that politely opens doors other people don't see, did what I will delicately call source and confirm. We learned through a public records request that the WeWork at the domain had logged after-hours access by 2 badges on the night our staging environment was poked. One belonged to Dorian's associate, the other to a contractor under Mark's Consulting LLC. Don't ask me how Tegan found that. I actually prefer not to know. Patrice packaged what we had and sent it to the Austin Police Department's Digital Crimes Unit with a memo that did not accuse so much as suggest. Maybe look here, maybe ask these people, maybe ask why a sales consultant had a contractor badge. I want to tell you this part moves like television, that the police swooped, that the villains confessed. It wasn't like that. It was slow and annoying and full of people who had better things to do than my startup drama. But another truth of being 54, you're patient because you have to be. Meanwhile, we worked. Tegan hardened our system, Amara refined the thimble to be idiot-proof and investor-proof, and I did the unglamorous work of calling facilities managers of apartment complexes in Austin and San Antonio, asking if they wanted to save money by not lighting up empty stairwells at noon. One said yes, then 2. A property in South Lamar signed a $3,000 pilot that wouldn't change the world but would change our LinkedIn banner. The email that changed our orbit came on a Sunday from a woman named Shay in San Diego. Saw your thing on a friend's feed, she wrote. We manage 20 apartment communities in North Park and Little Italy and are bleeding demand charges. Can you do California? I wrote back yes before thinking about how, then called Amara and Tegan on a 3-way like teenagers in 1996. 2 weeks later, I was on a Southwest flight to San Diego with a carry-on full of Raspberry Pi shells and a pitch deck set in Playfair display. Don't judge me. I walked Little Italy's India Street and promised myself I'd find a way to make the thimble feel like the San Diego breeze, effortless. At the same time, Judith's weather report bore fruit. Hale Ridge's counsel sent a polite, panicked letter indicating Dorian would withdraw the collateral arrangement and retract any prior filings. Patrice wrote back, We appreciate your withdrawal and require a written statement indicating the circumstances under which the collateral arrangement was originally proposed. Translation: say what you did, on paper, with your name. Dorian fought the sentence like a man who had never had to put his actions into the past tense. He offered, "We were operating under the assumption, and we regret any misunderstanding," and finally coughed up what Patrice wanted. The guarantor, Mark Delaney, proposed the arrangement to demonstrate confidence in the issuer. Patrice circled the words proposed and guarantor, smiled like a cat in a sunbeam, and sent another letter, this one to Mark. Producing the authorization and any communications reflecting consent would be helpful, she wrote. Mark responded with a PDF that might have worked if it hadn't had the wrong date, the wrong middle initial, and a signature that, according to a handwriting analyst Patrice knew from a case that involved a forged will, had tremors consistent with a non-native hand. It was very nearly plausible. Very nearly is not good enough. When people like Mark are cornered, they do one of two things: apologize or double down. He doubled. He called me from his real number at midnight, drunk enough to slur, furious enough to forget he was being recorded by my phone's default setting. "You were nothing until I made you look like something," he said. "No one would take you seriously at your age. You think it's unfair? The world is unfair. I was giving you a shot. You spit in my face." "I didn't ask you for anything," I said, voice shaking, not from fear, but from the shaking off of years. "You're going to regret this," he said, and hung up, which was the best gift he's ever given me. I sent the voicemail to Patrice at 12:04 a.m. At 8:30 a.m., she transcribed it, attached it to a new letter, and copied Judith. That afternoon, Judith wrote simply, "We're out." Hale Ridge's second fund was cut off from its Midland lifeline. Dorian sent a longer letter in which he said, "We respect your decision, and we wish you the best. And the thing I saved to read when my doubt is loud, at this time, we are no longer pursuing an investment in Parish Grid." I printed that one and taped it to my fridge under the Waterloo magnet. San Diego turned out to be the portal I wished Austin would be. Shay's 20 communities became 21 when her boss in a sleek office near Petco Park leaned back in a Herman Miller chair and said, "Everyone says they can trim our peak. You came with a binder of duct tape devices and the nerve to demo in a basement. I like people who show up." He signed a 6-month, $20,000 pilot. The pilot gave me the sentence I needed for cold emails to other places whose names carried weight. A property firm in Sacramento wrote back, then one in Glendale. My deck began to list California logos like a parade. I still woke at 3 a.m. some nights with the investor's clause glowing in my head like a neon sign. On one of those nights, I drove to the 360 bridge overlook and watched Austin's lights float above the dark. I called Claire and said, "What if I'm not built for the part where I always have to be brave?" She said, "You're built for the part where you do one brave thing, and then another, and then you call me, and I tell you to do a third." Then she said, "By the way, Mom's church group wants to know when they can invest." I laughed so hard I cried. About 3 months after the signing, the Digital Crimes Unit called Patrice and asked us to come in. The detective was a patient man with heavy eyelids who looked like he lived on burnt coffee and kindly skepticism. He explained they'd executed a warrant on a WeWork server after a separate complaint by another founder. "Your logs were corroborative, though," he said. They had emails between Dorian's associate and Mark discussing a nudge to my staging environment so that the deck looks more like the reality. They had a text where Mark wrote, "If she signs, I'll be on the board de facto," which made me nauseous in a way I had not felt since high school. They were referring the matter to the Travis County District Attorney. "I can't promise charges," the detective said, as if warning me against hope. "But I can promise conversation." Patrice didn't wait for the slow wheel of government to turn. She filed a civil suit against Mark for tortious interference and defamation per se, attaching the server logs, the WeWork access, the midnight voicemail, and the shoddy authorization documents. She filed another suit against Hale Ridge for deceptive practices, which we expected to settle. The filings were public. A reporter at the Austin American-Statesman, who had covered startup fluff pieces for years, called and asked if I wanted to talk. I said no. I didn't need a TED Talk. I needed a contract. Instead, Patrice gave a comment so calm it sounded like weather. We look forward to a fair process. Within a month, Hale Ridge settled, quietly, for an amount I won't name because I promised not to, and withdrew every filing they made with my name on it. Mark, however, decided to fight. He hired a lawyer who wore suits like armor and filed a counterclaim describing me as a spurned partner who misinterpreted assistance as malice. If I were 25, that might have rattled me into settling. At 54, all it did was make me memorize my receipts. The deposition was scheduled in a conference room at Norton Rose Fulbright's office downtown, windows glinting like a chorus. Mark arrived in a suit that telegraphed money and a smirk that telegraphed something else. Patrice whispered, "He's going to be unhelpful." Then she turned into a scalpel. She asked Mark to read his own authorization document into the record. She asked him to spell his middle name, to say his birth date, to describe his signature on a driver's license. She asked him whether he'd ever used a WeWork after hours. He said no. She produced a visitor log with his name and a timestamp that made no sound quaint. She asked him if he'd ever told a third party my code was duct tape and prayers. He said he didn't recall. She asked him to read his texts aloud. He did. His voice shook on, "No one would take you seriously at your age." The court reporter's keys clacked like rain. Mark tried to be charming with her. She did not smile. After lunch, Patrice asked him sweetly, "Have you ever pledged your personal credit as collateral for a business transaction?" "No," he said. "Exhibit 12, Patrice said, placing in front of him the Hale Ridge memo with his name next to guarantor in 12-point Times New Roman. For a second, he looked like a boy called into the principal's office who thinks maybe if he smiles, the adults will remember how cute he was at Christmas. Then he said, "That was a misunderstanding?" "Whose?" Patrice asked. Mark gestured at the page. "Everyone's." The transcript was my favorite book that month. We settled with him too, eventually, because Texas law is weird and juries are weirder, and I did not want to spend 2 years proving I was the kind of woman I already knew I was. The settlement included a confession of judgment that would become public if he breached. He signed it with a hand that shook. On the day he wired what he owed, I sat at the bar at Better Half with Tegan and Amara and ordered French fries and a hamburger. I've denied myself for years. I raised a Topo Chico like champagne. To writing our own math, I said, to building, to refusing to be the stage for anyone else's theater. I wish I could tell you that's where the story ends, that the universe cracked open and poured luck on me like a summer storm over Zilker Park. What happened was smaller, more ordinary, and more valuable. Parish Grid steadied. Shea and San Diego expanded from 20 communities to 35. A firm in Sacramento called Blue Oak signed a Poway 6-figure annual contract. We hired a customer success lead in Glendale and an obvious person in Austin who spoke fluent contractor. We moved out of the Elevator Bank office into a small, sunlit space near Cesar Chavez. I bought a rug. I told Claire we'd still come over for Sunday dinner. A year after the day Dorian slid the term sheet across the glass, I walked past Capital Factory and saw him in the lobby talking to a founder with the soft look on her face that says, "Finally, someone sees me." Dorian looked up and saw me. If this were a movie, he'd look ashamed. He didn't. He looked busy. The thing about men like him is they don't stop. They just find new rooms. But I stopped walking. I watched him. And then I did something I wouldn't have done 2 years earlier. I kept walking because he isn't my plot. I am. Months later, at a ribbon cutting for a retrofit at an apartment complex in East Riverside, the property manager whispered to me, "I heard about what you went through. I'm sorry." I smiled and said the only true thing left. It made me mean in the right direction. People ask if I miss Mark. I miss the version of me that believed there was a shortcut through other people's power. I miss the part of me that thought approval could be collateral for courage. But there's a freedom in being laughed at and then surviving. It made me precise. It made me patient. It made me choose the kind of help that looks like work. Sometimes at night, when the humidity is a blanket and the cicadas sound like 1,000 tiny rattlesnakes, I stand on my patio and read the last email Dorian ever sent me, the one with the line, "We are no longer pursuing an investment in parish grid." And I whisper, thank you to no one and to everyone. The neon of our little street flickers, the HEB fans turn somewhere in the distance, and Austin's new towers glow like corrections to a draft I no longer recognize. If you want to know the exact day I felt the payback, it was a Tuesday. I walked into the lobby of a hotel in downtown Los Angeles, the Ace, with its dark tile and the ghost of an old theater in its bones, to pitch a fund I had been too scared to email 2 years earlier. The partner was a woman with braids and a laugh that read as life and a calendar that read as power. She didn't make me square up against a trick clause. She asked me how much time I spent on the phone with maintenance men because, she said, that's the only way to hear the building breathe. At the end of the meeting, she said, we'll do $1.5 million on clean terms. And I felt everything in me go quiet, the good kind of quiet, like the room on a summer day when the AC clicks off and you realize you can hear your own heartbeat. When I got back to my hotel room, I sat on the bed, texted Claire, and then did the pettiest, most satisfying thing I have ever done. I opened a new email, typed Mark's address into the to field, and wrote, "We closed a round." I did not mention the amount. I did not mention the partner's name. I did not write anything else. I pressed send. Then I blocked his number again, just in case the past tried to call. Austin remains itself, proud and humid, and full of people who love breakfast tacos at Veracruz All Natural and Nirvana at the Hole in the Wall. People who will tell you tech is changing everything and nothing at all. I still walk the lake. I still make lists and stick them to my fridge with the silly blue guitar magnet. They've changed, though. They say things like, hire 2 field techs, and renew the Glendale lease, and take mom to the San Antonio River Walk, and once, in a moment of private glee, buy yourself something ridiculous. I bought a pair of boots from Allen's with stitching that looks like lightning. They hurt like hell the first week. They fit like armor now. If you're waiting for the cautionary note, here it is. The world is full of people who will volunteer as guarantors of your doubt. They will offer you credit for the privilege of owning your name. They will call it belief. They will show up in suits and scarves and tell you the math that says you're small. The answer I learned at 54, when my hands shook and my voice wavered and I called a lawyer instead of a friend, is not to argue with their math. It's to write your own. One last thing. On a rainy Thursday, I walked into the Travis County Courthouse to file a certificate for a DBA we needed for a new product line. The clerk had gray hair and pink nails and the kind of smile that can hold a stranger up for a minute. She stamped my forms and slid them back and said quietly, "I read about your case. Good for you." I nodded, throat tight, and walked back out into a city that didn't notice me. I passed a man losing a lawsuit on a bench, and a woman signing divorce papers, and a teenager applying for a change of name. I thought about how many times a day in that building people quietly decide not to be defined by the worst thing someone tried to do to them. When I reached the corner, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from our California ops lead. Thimble caught a spike at the North Park property, it read. Shaved $312 in 20 minutes. I laughed, alone on the wet sidewalk. The payout wasn't large, not in the math of venture capital, but in the math I care about, the math of grit and practice, of showing up and building anyway, it felt like a fortune. Then I put my phone away, pulled up my hood, and kept walking, listening to the city breathe. At home that night, I poured myself a bourbon, opened the patio door, and watched heat lightning flicker over the oak. I thought about the glass conference table where the investor once clicked his pen and tried to make my ex's credit card stand in for my worth. That table is a prop now, a set piece I don't need. The silence after the storm was a kind I recognize, earned, unthreatening, ordinary. I left the door open until the cicadas stopped and the air went cool, then wrote the last line on my list for tomorrow. It read, "Don't forget who set the terms." The end.